stand out over here. We have the map set.
Yeah, they're coming.
Okay. Unfortunately, the Blue and Gray magazine that came out about 2.5 years ago with an article by now retired park historian Jim Jobe, and the best maps ever based on the Ed Bars maps of the campaign, is out of print. They're trying to get that reprinted as soon as they can get some money to Eastern National and get the set reprinted. In your map set is at least one map from that grouping from Blue and Gray. The maps are numbered 1 through 9. The first map is the Upper Heartland map, January 1862, to kind of give you an idea where the dispositions of Confederate and Union forces were, and the river system, because this is going to be a river campaign with some railroad, as opposed to later on from Stones River south, it's going to be a railroad campaign and very little river support. When I did the Tullahoma tour last June for a bunch of people, Jim Jobe, the retired park historian, came on the tour with us along with Mike Manning, the park chief ranger. When he showed up in Murfreesboro where we were parking our cars, I said, "What are you doing here? There's no gunboats on this campaign." I said they couldn't get up the Elk River, too big, and the river's too small. So it's a different wars, and it transitions in Middle Tennessee as everybody's starting to move to the south. You can see the Federals have Paducah, Kentucky, and Smithland, Kentucky, which means they own the mouth of the Tennessee and the Cumberland Rivers and their junction with the Ohio River. There's a garrison, of course, at Fort Henry Donelson, garrison at Bowling Green, and then you have some troops that were over off in eastern Tennessee under George Crittenden, more commanded by Felix Zollicoffer, but Crittenden was his superior officer. And you can see the number of the fights that were out that way at Wildcat Mountain, and of course at Mill Springs in January '62. This Western Department of the Confederacy was called Department Number 2. Department Number 1 was the area around New Orleans, and come September of '61, Albert Sidney Johnston becomes the department commander, which means he owns everything wearing a gray uniform from the Appalachians to the Mississippi River. Later that department will be extended across the Mississippi River, and then after Sidney Johnston's death at Shiloh, Jefferson Davis will break Department Number 2 into 2 or 3 smaller departments, thinking along the lines of it's easier to control, and the problem is as historian Richard McMurray says, each department commander gets a case of local-itis, meaning my department is more important than the guy next to me, so if he sends me an appeal for help, I'm probably not going to send him any reinforcements. That manifests itself, in my opinion, in the biggest sense in the Western Theater in the Vicksburg campaign, because you have the Department of Alabama, Mississippi, and East Louisiana, which is in Vicksburg, and then just across the river is the Trans-Mississippi Department, and yet Davis does not have the troops of the Trans-Mississippi coordinating their efforts to, along with the Confederates on the east side of the Mississippi River. So that's the problem with Davis's departmental system. When they start looking at these forts, Tennessee, when it secedes on June 8, 1861, is looking at the neutrality of Kentucky to be its shield to cover the middle part of the state. So when they start raising troops and they start building their fortifications, it's along the Mississippi River. We'll start with Fort Pickering in Memphis and move on up Fort Harris, Fort Pillow, Fort Randolph, and then at opposite New Madrid, it's spelled Madrid, but it's pronounced Madrid. That's where Island Number 10 is going to be fortified, and that'll be your link to the Confederates over in Missouri, particularly Jeff Thompson. The story about who collapsed Kentucky neutrality first, I am firmly in the camp that it was done by the Federals in August 1861 when they opened Camp Dick Robinson. When Beriah McGoffin finds out about it, he sends an email to Lincoln complaining about this, that you're violating Kentucky's neutrality, and Lincoln sends a note back that basically says, I can't believe that you complain about Kentuckians coming to form to protect their state, but he neglected to tell McGoffin about the 2 Union Tennessee regiments that were also there, the 1st and 2nd Tennessee U.S. And then about 3 weeks later, Bishop Polk moves into western Kentucky and takes Hickman and Columbus. There's actually a new book on the war in Kentucky. It's the first one I've seen recently that actually blames Camp Dick Robinson for the collapse of Kentucky neutrality. But the Kentucky neutrality, basically, is Kentucky decides to be Switzerland and sit it out, minus the cheese, the chocolate, the beer, and the fine watches. But you do have bourbon, I understand.
And basketball.
And what was that?
Basketball.
And basketball, yeah, but that's not a real sport. Real sports have goaltenders, or they're played on Saturday with college guys. By the way, as a University of Georgia fan, who's a Louisville fan here?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for taking Todd Grantham off our hands. I'm so sorry for you. He was probably on the verge of getting canned. So we got Jeremy Pruitt out of Florida State with 3 national championships under his belt. So we'll take that over Grantham any day. So the Kentucky neutrality issue is indeed respected much more by the Confederates. In fact, that's why Camp Boone forms just outside Clarksville, where the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Kentucky, the basis of the Northern Brigade, will form and train. And there'll be training camps in western Tennessee, particularly around Union City area, where Kentuckians that want to join the Confederate Army will go. And initially, federal troops, or federal Kentuckians that would like to join there, go across the river from Louisville to Jeffersonville, Indiana, and nearby Cincinnati. Lovell Rousseau is established one of those camps at Jeffersonville. So everybody's trying to make nice about the neutrality issue, but I call it a house of cards, because you look at the 2 rivers that are your avenues of invasion into the Deep South that run perpendicular to your Confederate defense line, which runs from Cumberland Gap all the way to the Mississippi River. They bisect it. That's, of course, the Tennessee and the Cumberland rivers. And if you look in the official records, August 28, 1861, John C. Fremont, commanding the Department of the Missouri out of St. Louis, and at that time is Grant's boss. In fact, you can argue the only good thing he really did in the entire war was to appoint Grant commanding District of Cairo. He orders Grant to take Columbus, Kentucky on August 28, 1861. Because of the heights of the bluffs there. It'll be basically the Gibraltar of the Confederacy. They'll end up having 142 heavy pieces of artillery and corking up the bottle even further up the river than it was down where New Madrid is. So what Grant does in response to that is the smarter of the 2 things. As opposed to taking Columbus, he actually takes Smithland and Paducah, because you can control the mouth of the rivers. Although Cheatham's division was on the way to Paducah, Grant got there first and seized the city, and the Federals will never let either of those 2 towns go for the rest of the war. So because of the neutrality issue, when Tennessee decides to start building fortifications in the middle of the state, as opposed to just the west coast of Tennessee, they look at the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers as those avenues of invasion. And it has 2 prerequisites, the main one being having to be below the Kentucky and Tennessee border, and above the Memphis, Clarksville, and Louisville Railroad. You can see where it says Tillman in the center of your map. That's the Memphis, Clarksville, and Louisville Railroad. Crosses the Cumberland at Clarksville, crosses the Tennessee near Danville. So the forts had to be above that to protect it, but south of the Kentucky state line. About 3 or 4 miles into what's called Land Between the Lakes today was a better fortification area, high ground on both sides, only about 4 miles apart. And that becomes available, of course, once Kentucky's neutrality issue has fallen apart. But by that time, the work had advanced so much on Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, they decided not to go ahead and move it up there, which would have been a better situation, and go ahead and complete the work that they're doing. They're going to be short manpower to build these forts. One of the Alabama regiments that comes up from Alabama to fight here will bring about 300 slaves to help them along. This is not a big slave area, this county of Tennessee. It is the #1 iron producing area of the entire South, between the southern Kentucky counties of LBL, this county, Houston County, and a couple of other ones. There are over 80 establishments of iron furnaces. So you can imagine the blow to the Confederacy when the Federals will take control of this area for the rest of the war. So they will send a railroad engineer, a guy that builds railroads, named Adda Anderson. He's a civilian with a survey party up from Nashville, and he will come to Fort Donelson, where he'll name it Fort Donelson. It's a mile above the town, a mile below the town of Dover. The Cumberland and Tennessee rivers flow north, the Mississippi River flows south. And he will pick out a spot with about 100 plus feet above the river. You get good plunging fire for heavy artillery, good straight downrange shooting zone that runs about 2 miles before the river makes a curve. And he plots that one out, and that will end up, of course, being developed as Fort Donelson, named for Daniel Donelson, who was a Tennessee general who had to certify Adda Anderson's surveys. Then he rides over across Land Between the Lakes. The road that we're on now is a modern road. The old road kind of zigzags through this area, partly off to our right, which is called the Telegraph, or the Ridge Road, because, the Ridge Road to the Paytoma Furnace Road, because Paytoma Furnace was on the way, and then Ridge Road because it literally ran on the top of the ridge. That was the only road heading east-west in this area. The Confederates cut the military road between Dover and Fort Henry, and they called it the Telegraph Road because that's where the telegraph line went.
Coming up here, we see a marker that'll have us turning to the right.
Still a little bit up. busy orienting you and missed the right turn, but we'll just take a quick run over to Paris Landing State Park and turn the bus around. I'll show you where Ed Anderson will site originally Fort Henry. It was way up on a hill. If they had listened to him, it would still be there today, completely out of the water, high and dry. But when Daniel Donelson gets there, he doesn't like the fact that there's an S-curve in the river there at the time, and does not have good downrange capability for heavy artillery, about a mile as opposed to the 2 miles at Dover. So when when Donelson comes out this way to certify the surveys, I'll take a break here. The road to our left is part of the Confederate retreat route for the Henry garrison. They will cross Standing Rock Creek 5 times. The first of the crossings is down there a couple miles. You can drive about 85% of that retreat route to this very day. Anyway, back to the story. Donelson gets over here and he likes where Anderson picked out Fort Donelson, and then he gets over here and does not like where he picks out what will become Fort Henry, so he rides on this side of the river north about 8 miles to a place called Kirkman's Old Landing. Back in those days, steamboats didn't dock at places that had docks. They had flat areas where they would literally bottom out the steamboat. Typical steamboat drew about 6 to 7 feet draft. They were flat bottom, shallow draft boats. And then he would tie a rope to a stump that was there, or a tree or whatever, lower your gangplank, and then cargo and passengers would walk on or roll on and off. And Kirkman's Old Landing was such a landing. Tied in with the lumber industry that was prevalent in this area quite a bit, some of the small farm fields that were in the area. So if you're a farmer or a harvester of trees and wanted to get your crops to market, you had to do it by steamboat. The problem is Kirkman's Old Landing, we don't have a Tennessee Valley Authority dam and lock system now, or then like we do now. So during the winter rains that we get here in Tennessee, in which you get a good heavy rain over the course of a couple of days, your rivers will rise 2 feet an hour. In fact, that's what will happen during the Henry Donelson Campaign, is rain quite a bit, rising rivers, fast water. Actually, we can't do that. No, we can make the right turn there. We're good. I don't know why it was on my map. All right. Take a right turn. We're going to head towards where Fort Henry's outer works were. Standing Rock Creek is a couple miles off to our left, and the hill that I spoke about is literally right across the river at Paris Landing Park. Confederates will station a couple of units there at Paris Landing. Paris Landing, of course, will tie in to an event coming up in November of this year, 150th anniversary of Bedford Forrest's Johnsonville raid, because he will put guns at Fort Hyman. That's where they'll capture the USS Undying tin-clad gunboat and some transports. They'll put some guns at Paris Landing, and then sail upstream to Johnsonville and destroy over $6 million worth of Union supplies. They're going to be working with the park there at Johnsonville, which is a state park, along with Forest Park across the river, and the Fort Donelson people are going to have a big event coming off. So if you get down here that time, please do come and visit. So Anderson's survey doesn't work out for Donelson. Donelson goes to Kirkman's Old Landing and likes it because it's a 2-mile straight line down range for the heavy artillery, and you can see, when we get there, you'll see the top of Panther Island, which is mostly submerged now, but that would divide the channel. They could zero the guns in on the right side of the channel and put torpedoes on the left side of the channel to block that, forcing any Union naval incursion to come on the right side where their artillery is already zeroed. The problem is, when they get to start building the fort in the summer of '61, Joseph Dixon, artilleryman engineer, is put in charge of building it, and some farmer comes up and basically says to him, "You're not around from these parts, are you?" Dixon says, "No, I'm not. I'm from another part of Tennessee." He says, "If you look up the tree trunks, you'll see how high the floodwater marks are. In the wintertime, this fort will be completely underwater." This is why you like to teach military engineering to people, because you're not supposed to build forts on places that flood. One of the 3 forts built in Clarksville was also built on the floodplain, and they had the same flooding problems as well. In fact, in the naval battle here, where they take on the garrison at Fort Henry on February 6, 1862, the gunners will be waist deep in water from all the rain. So they're constantly not only having to fight their guns to hold off the Federal gunboats, they're